Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we've operated Vanguard court watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Brian Hofer from Secure-Justice. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing good, David. Appreciate you having me on.
So tell us, what is Secure-Justice? What do you guys do?
Personally, it was my attempt at having one job, still trying to figure out how to wear one hat. But what we are is a C3. We're located in Oakland, primarily working in California, but we are materially involved in many projects with municipalities and community groups across the country. I was a truly independent volunteer, unfunded activist for about 6 years, just kind of working around my day job for a while on a lot of privacy and surveillance related matters. And eventually just the success we were having, the demands for more help led to me and a group of friends that I've been working with in the Bay Area for quite a while to form Secure-Justice. And we say our mission statement is that we advocate against the state abusing its power, and we also target the corporations that help facilitate those human rights abuses. And so although we kind of all primarily were working on surveillance and privacy invasive policing practice, law enforcement practices, we've started to branch out a bit more into criminal justice reform as well. Partly just some of our board members that have gone through the system and formerly incarcerated, just looking at barriers to entry. And that's really when we started, paying attention to folks like you, awareness you were raising about unlawful arrests, prosecutor misconduct. Jeffrey and Bill and a number of other folks, we began having discussions with them about maybe how we can, work on legislation here in California together. And so we're broadening our scope in that regard a little bit. But, whether it's, I kind of see surveillance as like sort of the slower, longer harm, whereas of course, like unlawful use of force, there's an immediate threat to your life. But they're both the same. At a base level, the state agents are abusing their power. And, that's what we try to be a guardrail against.
How did you get into this space in the first place?
Pure accident. I still don't understand my life, how it's turned out. I had been living in Oakland for about 15 years, had never once even thought about walking into City Hall. I'd never been inside City Hall, not even by accident, not for a tour. I didn't know who was on the city council. Had never done any advocacy work. I grew up in a politically minded family. We paid attention. I read the news, newspaper every day and watch news. I pay attention, but I never got off the couch. And after about 15 years being in Oakland, this project that nobody knew existed called the Domain Awareness Center showed up on a city council agenda. That was in June of 2013, and it had the wonderfully unfortunate timing of being 2 weeks behind some guy named Edward Snowden hitting the front pages. So as Mr. Snowden is revealing all the federal surveillance level practices, And keep in mind, so this is 2013. We had Occupy Oakland in 2012, which was big and important, but also ended pretty badly. There was just a lot of energy and anxiety in Oakland at that time when this hit. And so as Snowden was kind of pulling back the curtain to reveal what was happening at the federal level, the administration tried to sneak in under the radar this domain awareness center, which today most people would call a real-time crime center. It would commingle inputs from surveillance tech like license plate readers and ShotSpotter and cameras. They were going to specifically put cameras in public housing and public schools. Even back in 2013, they were talking about facial recognition, even though it was nowhere near ready, for prime time. And they were going to commingle databases with, the feds. And so, of course, we've also got sanctuary and immigration concerns. The FBI, which, has especially since 9/11 has targeted Muslims here in the Bay Area. So there's just all this energy in the air. We had no privacy policies in Oakland for any technology at all. It was a complete Wild West. They didn't think it was a big deal. They didn't think we needed a use policy for this massive big project, and no media coverage. It slides through. The first phase of the contract goes through. There was a sort of very unorganized, half-hearted attempt. And I say half-hearted because there was only a few people that even were aware of this thing. They just didn't have, enough help trying to slow it down, and that didn't work. And then finally, I had quit a litigation firm at the end of that year, and our local zine, the East Bay Express, did a cover story. They had researched thousands of pages of public documents that they got under the Public Record Act, and did this big expose. And I read that in the middle of the early part of January. I was sitting on my coffee table, and no one in my social circle had known about it. There was no mainstream media coverage. I've done my undergrad and grad school here in Oakland, and just, I know a lot of people, and no one knew this thing existed. There'd been no public vetting, no scrutiny at all. And I finally got motivated. I'm like, what? I think, partly I had time on my hands. I wasn't doing anything. So I'm like, let's go show up and see what could happen. And there was a group of folks that were trying to rally to oppose it, but they just, they had no strategy. They hadn't talked to any of the elected officials. They didn't know what they were doing, and neither did I. I mean, I had no training, no experience. But I just showed up and, put on the suit and tie and walked inside to go tell the city council members, we're going to sue you over this, and you need to slow down and stop it. And the legal threat worked enough to stall. We stalled a couple votes, and that's what allowed us to build just a giant, massive coalition. And every time we stalled a vote, our coalition got bigger and bigger, and we finally started getting press coverage. And finally, on March 4th, 2014, I was awake for 26 hours straight. I started off at a 5 a.m. radio debate with one of the council members. I did media all day long. It was a 5:30 city council meeting. The vote didn't happen until 1:30 in the morning. We had the council chambers were filled, standing room only. I mean, they brought in 100 police officers to ring the council chambers and just intimidate us. It was honestly one of the most exciting, most amazing days of my life, just the energy. And by a single vote, and this is the only close vote I've ever had in my career at any level, it was a 5-4 vote. The project technically survived in a very skeletal manner, but all the alarming red flag parts have been stricken from the project. And the real important thing that came out was that we got an ad hoc privacy commission, and regular citizens, one of which was me, were tasked with creating privacy policies for the city of Oakland. And after only maybe our second meeting, we realized this was going to be a permanent need. There's always going to be new and emerging technologies. The city and just pretty much every municipality I've ever worked with, they don't have the subject matter expertise. They don't have the bandwidth to deal with this stuff. they just, believe whatever the police tell them or whatever any staffer tells them and just rubber stamp this. And they don't realize the harm and the data security issues at risk. So we were able to successfully convince the city council to make it a permanent body. It became the first municipal oversight body in the country that had oversight of surveillance technology in the city of Oakland. And I was appointed to that body. I've been the chair the whole time. And that kind of helped me obviously create, raise my own profile. And that's when we eventually led to forming Secure-Justice and basically just scaling up, trying to take that and replicate it. We recently consulted with groups down in San Diego. We helped them get a Oakland model privacy commission and surveillance vetting framework, and just kind of doing that all over now and branching out into criminal justice a bit more.
So how did you go from there to more of the criminal justice realm?
It's a couple for a couple reasons. One, as I alluded to earlier, sort of that difference between like this sort of long, slow harm from surveillance, right? We often don't know we've been harmed until 30, 40 years after the fact, COINTELPRO infiltrating the Panthers, so on and so forth. You don't find out till much later. That doesn't mean the harm wasn't done. It was. You just didn't discover, that your group got split apart and your coalition died because the FBI was infiltrating you. The unbelievable amount of officer-involved fatalities, our rampant mass incarceration numbers, the amount of money. I mean, here in California, David, it's, in my lifetime, I think we built one university, UC Merced, and we've added like 15 more jails. It's stunning how we prioritize, our budget. It's always on prosecution and enforcement. It's never on public defense. And I just started seeing, I was like, okay, there's more immediate dangerous harm on the criminal justice side. We're very good at what we do legislatively and from a policy basis. Like, can we go take that expertise and move it into the criminal justice world and help these folks? Because bodies are dropping, for lack of a better way to say it. People were getting killed. I started paying attention to those, police killing trackers. I think, for like the last 5 years, we've averaged like 3 per day. Where somewhere a law enforcement agent in the country is killing people. And, you see, your Laquan McDonald's and Tamir Rice and just all these horrible stories over these last few years where these fatalities are occurring. And so it just became a little bit of a strategy, but also just like, hey, there's way more harm happening over here faster than the surveillance side. And also just, we had kind of gotten pretty entrenched in California. We have a lot of good surveillance vetting frameworks in place now. We've got some good laws at the state level. We're even, got a lot better consumer privacy protection. So it's by no means fixed, but we're way better now on the privacy side in California than we used to be, and we're still horrible on the criminal justice side. And so we just wanted to help folks and move into that space a bit more.
And I don't think a lot of people realize, like you were mentioning COINTELPRO. I mean, that stuff was real. Like the FBI was literally infiltrating into justice groups, and they were doing this stuff for real. This wasn't somebody's paranoia.
Yeah, it's everybody, you start talking about this stuff, and like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, you got a tin hat on. It's like, well, here's the FBI's own documents. You read it and you tell me, and especially here in Oakland, it was really heightened. You read the documents about them infiltrating the Panthers. The Panthers did not implode on their own. It was the weight of the federal government focused on them, targeting them from the inside and with misinformation and creating these rivalries and factions that split them apart. Like, that's, divide and conquer is one of the oldest strategies around. And that's what they did. We started, once people started knowing who I was, larger groups, ACLU, Brennan Center, they started sending me documents about the surveillance they had discovered on Occupy Oakland. The FBI, the Marshals, the ATF, where DHS was out here surveilling the big encampment in front of City Hall. They were terrified. The Port of Oakland, The Longshoremen's Union have been very active. They've blockaded certain things for political reasons. They've just shut down with general strikes, to advocate for better wages. And the police state hates that. Our police have actively fired on our longshoremen. 2003 was a massive scandal. There were fatalities, millions and millions of dollars in legal liability out the door, like we always do in Oakland. So it's really personal and heightened in Oakland because we have such an active activist community, and we're one of the few places that we fight back and we advocate for the civil rights and the human rights of all people, and the police state doesn't like that. So they're very focused in Oakland on targeting people. And it hurts big time. You might not realize it in the moment, but it's like, I wonder why that movement eventually failed, or why'd they lose steam, or what happened. It's like, well, you find out 20 years later in your COINTEL documents, like there was a campaign to destroy those movements, and that has massive societal implications.
Yeah. Have you paid attention to the debate in San Francisco over the use of the security cameras?
Yeah, this is the big wrinkle I'm facing all across the country in our work. And it's often more when I've got my privacy commissioner hat on rather than maybe secure justice. But this blurring of public and private partnerships. I think it's partly in response to the success of all our surveillance ordinances. San Francisco has one just like the Oakland model. And because, these guardrails are put in place that have limited the police department's ability, to commit harmful mass surveillance, they're like, okay, we'll just go privatize it. You can't regulate them the way you're regulating us, and we'll just go use their footage. And you also, at the same time, create this media campaign of unreasonable fear and that we're all dying of murder every 2 minutes, and San Francisco's lawless anarchy. And so, of course, you've what did Noam Chomsky call it? Manufactured consent, right? Oh, we want to cooperate with the police. We want to turn over all our video footage. We don't need warrants for anything. And well, now we just created this privately funded mass surveillance network all across the city. And you can make all the good talking points up front to justify it. It's like, San Francisco has a tenderloin and there was a smash and grab problem and da-da-da. Like, you can say all those things up front. And then, of course, we always look at it after the fact. It's like, well, what'd you really use it for? And it's like, well, to monitor the George Floyd protests, right? And that's what we kept saying in Oakland when we had this big fight over the Domain Awareness Center. We had a predecessor. It wasn't as robust, but our Emergency Operations Center also had some surveillance networks. And we finally got the real data. It had been used in this 10-year period that it was audited. It had been used 19 times. Once, you might remember when the maze melted down, that truck caught on fire and the maze melted. And of course, that's, a California-wide catastrophe because the Bay Area is so critical and the port is so critical. So that was used once, and you go, okay, that's legitimate. The other 18 were all for protests. Every single other use was for First Amendment protected activity. And so, that's what we keep trying to tell people is like, you can say all your nice, friendly things up front, but we know what you're going to actually do with this in practice, and it's to monitor protest activity. And that's what's happened in San Francisco with George Floyd. I worked on some after action reports in Los Angeles. They had the similar problem, in response to the George Floyd protests, where they just threw an army of surveillance technology at people, and they're tracking you by your license plates, who's at what protest. You could see a heightened concern now in this post-Roe v. Wade world. We've already got consumer data brokers that we're watching that are actively selling data. They're marketing it for people who have been geolocated close to abortion clinics, who have done keyword searches, internet queries for abortion or alternatives, pills, contraceptives, etc., period tracking apps. All that data is now being sold to law enforcement agencies in at least the 7 states where it's potentially a murder charge, a felony, if you get this procedure done. And so we're trying to communicate that to people. It's like, there's real problems here that you think your benign security camera network isn't going to lead to these results. And we're telling you it absolutely is already occurring. And you need to start paying attention and look, people are like, oh, we can have public safety or privacy. No, it's not a binary choice. We can do both, but you've got to have appropriate policies and guardrails in place, and then hold folks accountable for the misconduct, which, as you know, accountability always seems to be the missing component in the American justice system.
Well, and as somebody who's poured over a lot of these surveillance videos over time, I mean, the utility of them for public safety purposes is pretty limited. You're talking about people in the dark, walking around with ski masks and hats and whatnot. You're just not going to be able to identify them. It's just like, the news shows that show, hey, this guy walking away, we think this was the suspect. Well, oh yeah, I can tell who that is by how they walk, right?
Yeah. It's partly because of the political climate we've been in. We've changed our talking points. The privacy angle, it's just not getting traction right now because people believe the media narrative, and so we've started tackling it on efficacy. There's only three white, but they were very well done, PhD peer-reviewed white papers in the country that looked at license plate readers from a statistical viewpoint analysis. All three said, as crime fighting tools, they are statistically zeros. They're invisible. That doesn't mean there aren't one-offs here and there, but like the way they're used at the volume to commit mass surveillance, it's ineffective. A human is just as effective standing out there on a corner. It's essentially a coin flip. ShotSpotter has never reduced gun violence in any jurisdiction in the country. Cameras, and these have been studied for at least the last 30 years, including the big CCTV networks in like London and elsewhere. Cameras have never had a deterrent effect anywhere. They might displace crime. It moves around the corner when you put your camera up, but it doesn't on net reduce it. And so we keep trying to tell people, it's like, look, America has tried to enforce our way out of crime for hundreds of years. If it's not working, why would we keep doing the same thing? That's what was really frustrating, David, about the camera policy in San Francisco. It's been studied to death, specifically in San Francisco. UC Berkeley studied the Tenderloin specifically in the camera networks, open air drug raids. It's like these things do not work. Statistically, they do not work. And what we do know is going to happen is, one, a huge financial outpouring of our resources, right? We throw money at it. And number two, civil liberties harm. We seem to just keep magically arresting the black guy over and over and over. And that's who's in our jails. So we know these things. And yet, Americans, it's just like we pretend like, no matter that something happened 100 times in a row, it's like we're going to suddenly change the law of averages and be the exception. And obviously it's not working. And that's what's, I think, the scariest thing, and probably I'm sure to you too, in San Francisco, is like, Mayor Breed and others, DA Jenkins now, after the recall of Chesa, like reigniting the war on drugs. It's like you have 60 years of data, it doesn't work, and this is what you're going to go tell people. But if it gets you reelected, that's why they're saying it.
Boggles my mind.
Yeah.
Honestly, this last year has just been like, hey, we tried this. It doesn't work. Yeah. What are we doing?
Yeah. And, the board gave her over $150 million to get housing. She didn't buy housing. And she's not getting people off the streets. But she's saying the only solution is more policing. It's like you were given the actual resource. Like San Francisco is one of the few places that has money. They had the resources. They said, go buy housing. This will give the people the stability they need to get off the streets, to get any substance or mental help that they need, to get back on their feet. That's what they need. Utah has shown that it's worked. Salt Lake City, right? Portland, San Antonio, like everywhere in Europe, the Denmark model, all these places have shown it works. And we even here in capitalist America, we've shown it's worked. Salt Lake City is a wonderful model I've been studying. And you know what they did? They just gave everyone a house. But here in San Francisco, where we pretend we're all the smartest people in the room, and tech's going to solve everything, and we're all data driven until we're not. We suddenly think the war on drugs is the only solution, and I can't believe that people this educated are falling for it.
Yeah, I just on this show a few weeks ago had one of the public defenders on from San Francisco. She goes, "We know what works: permanent supportive housing."
Yep.
And I would add, couple it with substance treatment and some mental health funding and some job training, and you're in good shape.
Yep, exactly.
It's not rocket science here.
Yeah, they need the wraparound services and other folks. It's just like universal healthcare, right? All the other developed countries in the world have shown it works. They've made it work. Some of them have made it work for decades and decades and decades. It's financially possible. It's pragmatic, and yet America says it can't work. And we've just got that mental block. Our culture just hasn't evolved in these areas where we need it to.
So in terms of this coming year, what are you guys looking at?
We're looking, we haven't finalized, officially voted, our board hasn't voted yet on our legislative packet, but we're looking at a prosecutor misconduct bill, which, you're probably aware of, just talking to Bill or Jeffrey, some other barriers to reentry, sentencing enhancements, some punishments. Also, like there's a really a unique one or I guess it's not all that unique. It was a bit obscure, but an impacted individual brought us his story. He had his driving rights permanently taken away because of a past conviction, and it had nothing to do with his vehicle whatsoever. And he's out in the boondocks, and he's like, if I can even get an Uber to come out here, it's $30 each way, and the cost is just so prohibitive. He's like, I'm basically riding a bike, or I don't have reliable public transit. And so we're looking at some of those barriers to reentry. At the local level, it's kind of been mostly trying to just play defense, not lose these surveillance ordinances. Oakland was the first municipality to ban all biometric surveillance and predictive analytics. We were 3 days ahead of New Orleans. And I don't know if you saw, but New Orleans actually repealed their bans. Just overwhelming, media hysteria and police pressure. And they took away those protections. And so that's what we're worried about as we see San Francisco start to falter. And even the folk, we're going to defund. No one, in this so-called radical progressive Bay Area, no one took a penny from any of their police departments. And some of them gave the police way, way more money. And so we're trying to work on some of that. Because a couple of the cities are going to be going into their budget cycles next year. So we want to be prepared to try to divert, more funds towards, like civilianization and traffic enforcement or mental health programs like Macro, like Oakland and Berkeley are doing now. We've got a number of lawsuits happening where we are defending the surveillance models, suing both. We've got multiple suits against Berkeley right now. We've got a big one against the city of Oakland, and we've got an even bigger, juicier one that a number of your public defender friends are going to be very involved in, that we're going to be filing probably in a month. So we're keeping busy. We're still, I'd probably say we're in 10 states right now across the country where folks are either trying to do a privacy commission or maybe just figure out ways to slow down or mitigate the harms of surveillance networks in their respective jurisdictions.
What are your thoughts on the election from this week?
pleasantly, gratefully, and thankfully surprised it wasn't worse. I really did expect the worst. And I think, and obviously I'm not the originator of this thought, like, the Roe v. Wade thing might have been the Republicans' mistake. They should have waited till after, they should have asked the Supreme Court to stall and do it after the midterms, because I think that reignited just enough people on the left. I saw almost all my allies either retain their seats or move up or get reelected here in the Bay Area. So I was really thankful. We're going to probably have the most progressive Oakland City Council in history in January, which I'm really excited about, but also stunning, because I really hold Oakland up. Like, we should be sort of the resistance, the bastion of defending, progressive ideals. Our voter turnout, it was something like 15% or less. I cannot believe how bad it was, especially when there were so many races locally, so many measures locally at issue. I like, that is frightening to me. Georgia is still scary to me. There was reports of the armed militias, intimidating people at voting booths. Voting disenfranchisement is a big area we might start focusing on as well. But Pennsylvania and some of these other places, I mean, that was great. That was amazing to watch, these new progressive, candidates come in. There's a lot of women of color, people of color, young people. That one congressman now is like, I think 30 years old, 28 years old, the first Gen Z guy like ever elected. I mean, so there was a lot of good news. We didn't lose as badly as we thought. I was really disappointed in this last legislative cycle in California. The number of good bills, necessary bills that were killed by the moderate Democrats was really frustrating. I'm hoping that was because it was an election year and we'll finally stand by our values this next season. The governor's safe, the attorney general's safe, and a number of the other folks are safe now. So I'm hoping we finally push the envelope again. Because it was really frustrating. There's some really good legislation that I objectively do not think was that controversial, and it still just went down in flames. So I'm hoping we get a better state legislative season this year.
What do you think is going to happen in the Alameda DA's race?
I love Pam, and unfortunately, just the numbers I think the gap's a little too big. I think partly, the south and the east parts of Alameda County are really conservative. And if Oakland's turnout really is as bad as they're saying, like 15% or less, that's what hurt her, is that enough people in Oakland didn't show up. Her base is more, Oakland, Alameda City, Berkeley, San Leandro, the eastern sort of urban core. We're just more, progressive, more blue than the other part of the county. Like Alameda County is purple. It's ultra conservative in some areas. We've had one of the worst sheriffs in California history, Sheriff Ahern, and he got reelected, easily until this last election cycle when he finally lost. Just so many scandals in the federal receivership of the Santa Rita jail, but he won easily just by carrying those conservative parts of the county. Oakland could never run a candidate and could never stop him, and unfortunately, that's what's been happening with the district attorney race probably as well.
Well, thanks for checking in. Sounds like you guys have your work cut out for you in the next year.
Yep, I appreciate chatting with you. I'm sure we're going to be talking and collaborating a lot in the future. You guys, I'm a super nerd. I need to know everything about everything, and I love having the information that you guys keep providing and putting in your newsletters and just getting that stuff out there. You guys are very, very good at finding the impacted folks and highlighting those stories, and that's what makes our policy work. It's you don't need a policy fix if there's no injury. If there's no impacted person, what are we sitting here for? Just talking in an academic context. But when we've been able to have those folks and bring them to the legislative meetings and really put a why, on the bill, on the need for the bill, it's been wonderful, and you guys are doing really great work at that. So I wish you all the best and success, and I hope your audience is acknowledging and responding favorably to, I'm sure you're doing some year-end fundraising appeals, and I hope you guys are able to just keep fighting on, because we need it.
Well, thanks. That's Brian Hofer from Secure-Justice. This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.
Thank you to George Powell and Norman Mousequake Barrett for the use of our opening, Everyday Injustice. You can see more of George's music at www.justiceforgeorgepowell.com. That's justiceforgeorgepowell, all one word, .com.